Network. And today's topic is patterns. And it's interesting how, we talk a lot about beliefs and pattern behavior, but there are also patterns of circumstance that tend to present themselves in our lives. Patterns of circumstance, patterns of relationship. And so we're going to talk a bit about that this morning. But before we get started, good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to have you joining us this morning. Before we get started, let's take a moment or two to get present. So let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And let's now take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And this time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your molecules, all your cells, all your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together, vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop. And allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables you to experience life. Welcome. Good morning, Rubin. So good to have you here with us too. And welcome to everybody else who's joining us. Today we're talking about patterns and cycles too, I guess. That for instance, I've seen this in relationships where we might get involved with someone and there's a certain pattern that develops, and there's issues, shall we say, that that remain unresolved. We terminate the relationship, get into another relationship, and there's the same issue again, or multiple issues. They're the same dynamics again. Or we have circumstances where we make an investment in this has been something for me where I've invested in what I thought was my future, and then things ended up going south in one way or another, and then there's been a struggle and a fight, and seeing echoes of these things happening over and over again. Or when we work on our own stuff and we believe that we have dealt with an issue and then it comes back again. And so what is up with these cycles and these patterns? And I'm wondering if we allow ourselves to interpret these patterns as opportunities. One of the foundational premises that I operate from, and sometimes it's a challenge, is that if it's coming up to heal. And that life is happening for us and through us rather than to us. So even when it feels like we're being victimized or villainized or just sort of at the effect of circumstances in the world, that there's an opportunity for us. Now, stepping back from the emotional engagement or the emotional overwhelm or the personalizing of these circumstances or experiences or interactions, stepping back from that to look at the underlying dynamic, to discover the opportunity. I don't mean to paint something over, like to, what we want to do is we want to turn poop into compost, ultimately. Let's just say it that way. But we don't want to be in denial. We don't want to just gloss over the dynamics and the feelings and the underpinnings of this whole thing. We want to be able to look at it. But the thing that helps us to look at it is to be able to pull ourselves up out of the trenches, so to speak, to stand back and see if we're able to recognize the bigger picture, the broader dynamics, to be able to look at something in a greater context, maybe depersonalize it for ourselves enough that we can maybe gain some perspective and to see, well, how do we address this? And it's interesting to see. I've been talking to you lately about limbic system retraining. And so many of us have experienced traumas that have created certain pathways in our brain and nervous system that have become deeply entrenched, and they're not necessarily conscious. It's not like we're consciously choosing, but these things can show up in a wide variety of ways. So in my case, I've experienced a bunch of different autoimmune issues, from asthma from the time I was a young kid, asthma and allergies and migraines. And I even had a bout of alopecia when I was an adolescent. And then since then, irritable bowel and all these other conditions. We'll call them conditions. What's awesome is, let's call them symptoms. What's awesome is that with this notion of limbic system retraining, all of those things are symptoms of the limbic system dysfunction. So the patterns are a function of things on very many different levels, I think. So in one way, these patterns are energetic, right? Like we're attracting certain things because we're stuck on a certain frequency. The thing is that as we evolve and grow, it's kind of like a spiral of change. And we keep coming around back to those same issues to see how we are in relation to them, to see what's changed, how we've evolved, how we've been able to metabolize and integrate and heal from whatever those wounds are that we keep coming back around to in one way or another, until ultimately they get healed, as long as we keep at it, right? Hopefully they get healed as we keep at it. But the other thing is, though, that these patterns are also deeply entrenched in our physiology, that the brain actually mutates with experience. When we talk about neuroplasticity, it's a neutral term. Neuroplasticity in and of itself is neither positive nor negative. We can, because we have the ability for our brains to change and shift and grow and adapt, we can also have maladaptations. which is what a limbic system impairment is, where certain patterns of fight and flight and fear essentially are entrenched that activate or overactivate a physiological system that is trying to defend itself from a threatening environment. So when we talk about law of attraction, it's very interesting because we talk about it as an energetic and a frequency kind of thing. The thing is that frequency, we are energy, and we have a physical form, and that energy impacts our physical form and vice versa. So in terms of addressing these patterns, when we can frame them as something that is opening an opportunity to us, when we can allow ourselves not to be submerged or submerge ourselves into this constant rumination that is more deeply entrenching the pattern, then we have the ability to start shifting it, which is really interesting because the inclination is, I have to figure this out. I have to figure this out. And it becomes like the fear-driven, adrenaline-driven response to certain situations. Or we keep talking about what all the problems are. And as we're talking about what all the problems are, we're working ourselves back into this state that then kind of precipitates and perpetuates the problem. So it's very interesting to learn how, or to learn that we can even sort of walk a line where we are not at the effect of these patterns, like where we can recognize the pattern, we can see where we're at the effect of them, and we can step back. So I've been talking a lot about this DNRS, dynamic neural retraining system. And I actually signed up for, there's a training, and then there's months of practice to help repattern the brain. But what's very interesting is that all these patterns of thought, emotion, behavior, rather than being manifestations of individual and separate conditions, because a bunch of us have a litany of those conditions, instead of recognizing each and every individual manifestation, symptom, that instead there's this umbrella, instead of talking about all the symptoms, to be looking at, oh, this is limbic system stuff. I get to, I'm in the process of repatterning that. So rather than the whack-a-mole of having to address every individual pattern, we can be looking at the meta patterns that connect these patterns. So for instance, when there's anxiety, what's underneath the anxiety? There's an anxiety about this, an anxiety about that, an anxiety about the other thing. And we could be trying to address all those different anxieties, but it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole. As soon as you get one, there's another one. Instead, what we want to be looking at is addressing the underlying, the foundation of that anxiety. What is it? What is it? Where is it? And one of the answers is there's a physiological thing happening. There's an energetic and emotional way and behavioral way to be shifting that physiological thing. It takes intention and commitment and consistency and practice, because you're literally creating a new pathway. So if you imagine skiing down a newly snow, a new snowfall, skiing down a slope with a new snowfall, there's no path yet, right? So the going might be a bit slower as the path becomes more defined. Then we have the ability to pick up speed, right? Or we are able to transit that path more easily. So same thing with, if you've ever tried driving in the snow, right? Initially, it's slow going, but then eventually there are trenches that are dug into the snow. And sometimes we want to, those trenches are taking us in the wrong direction. And what we need to do is to create a new pathway and a new channel. I would rather say channel in this case than trench, right? But a new pattern. And this whole notion of repatterning, one of the things that we tend to do is to say, oh my gosh, here I am again. Here I am again, having to address the same old thing. And the reason for that is that we see similarities, right? We typically will sort for similarities so that we know how to address something. Oh, I've been here before. I didn't address it well then, apparently. Here it is again. And now what? So that's not the right, that's not the best conversation. That's why we talk about the spiral of change, because as we come to this new circumstance, we're not the same person. We may have memory of the trauma of that, but we're not the same person. And the inclination might be to fall back into those patterns from the past, but we don't have to. Once we recognize it, we can say, well, wait a second, what's different? I'm different. How am I different? What, how can I look at this? And what are the similarities that are still remaining, and how can I address them to elevate that to the next place? So Rosalind says, I'm finally introducing light exercise on a daily basis, stretching. Congratulations, Rosalind. That's a really, really good thing. And she says, I look forward to it now rather than feeling resistance. Well, that's huge. And actually, I was reading up on how the vagus nerve is the longest nerve in the body, and it goes from the brain all the way down through affecting our lungs, affecting our digestion, affecting our reproductive system, and a whole bunch more. It affects pretty much everything. And I was looking at how to heal the vagus nerve. And this is part of the limbic system, or at least it's a direction that I'm taking in trying to understand this whole thing. And one of the things is exercise. So I too I have a rebounder. So I spend 30 minutes in the morning on the rebounder. And another thing, interestingly, certainly being outside is another thing. Another thing is exposure to cold. Well, I have had a trainer who was touting and extolling the virtues of cold showers. Now, I'm a person who has historically really hated the winter, because I would get cold, and I would be cold. At least this is my story. I would be cold from the first frost until the thaw in the spring. And my fingers and toes would be cold, and I would be depressed. And I had this whole story about it. So you can just imagine how eager I was to go have cold showers. I mean, the hot shower in the morning is what would warm me up, would allow me to feel my fingers and toes again. And so the last thing I was interested in doing was a cold shower. But then I read that the vagus nerve really, or healing of the vagus nerve really benefits from exposure to cold. So I've been doing my regular shower, and at the end, turning off the hot water and being under the cold. And of course I'm gasping and groaning, but it's really interesting um, how truly enlivening it is to do that. And what I'm thinking is that it's sort of shocking my system into, and like adding a shock to a battery, sort of shocking my system into greater aliveness. And it's one of those things that it feels so good, so good when you stop. And it's interesting because I had been doing it for a while, and then when I broke my wrist, I stopped, and I've started again. And before I stopped, I was actually, true confession, starting to enjoy it, to be able to relax into it a bit more. And instead of being caught in all my ideas and about being cold and how much I hate cold showers and how much I dislike the cold, and instead of being caught in all those conversations, I was enabling myself to just have the experience. And the experience is kind of interesting and invigorating, even though it's still, I have to confess, feels really good when I stop. But so there are things that we can physically do. We can change our behavior, do a pattern interrupt when we find ourselves going down one of these not so rosy paths. We can stand, if we're sitting down, we can stand up and do a superhero pose. Um, if we're kind of feeling low, we could just start singing or dancing. It takes a lot of will to get out of the inertia, to get into motion, to actually do something. But if we can give ourselves a why, that can really help. So for me, exercise for the sake of exercising wasn't enough. It just wasn't enough. Cold showers for the sake of cold showers wasn't enough. When I made the association with the limbic system and the vagus nerve, and recognize that this is something that can positively impact my mental, emotional, and physical health and well-being, and lift my energy overall, that has made a difference. That has been something that is providing me with the level of motivation to actually get my butt into gear. So I think that this is a really important thing, is to be connected to a compelling reason to be engaging in these behaviors and repatterning. We need to have a compelling enough idea that allows us to, or a compelling enough why that propels us forward into the consistency and the momentum to break through the inertia. And that's an important, really, really important discovery, not discovery, but acknowledgement, recognition. So many of us make New Year's resolutions, right? Well, I'm going to lose however many pounds, I'm going to be nicer to myself, whatever it is, any number of different commitments that we make to ourselves for New Year's, and then the resolutions fall by the wayside. The reason is because we don't have a big enough why to keep us going. So I noticed when I was going to go to an event that was going to require my strength and my resilience, my physical stamina, I went to the gym every day for several months ahead. And I have to say, I haven't done it really for quite some time since. And that's because I haven't had a compelling why. So Ralston says, my why for doing exercise was to have a deeper meditation and to help stay awake rather than fall asleep. Has that worked, Rosalind? I mean, that's awesome. So clearly the meditation, the quality of your meditation is something that's really, really important to you. So congratulations for taking action that is going to support you in that intention. And whatever your why is, find some kind of why that is compelling to allow you to move out of these patterns. And often just recognize, often the way we interact with or interpret the pattern is part of the pattern itself. So for instance, when we see an issue that we've dealt with for years and years come back, and we start beating ourselves up about, oh my gosh, I thought this was done. I thought I was, I've spent forever. Am I going to have to deal with this forever? That whole conversation is part of the pattern. So when we talk about see the meta pattern, that means stand back and see the bigger picture that is connecting all these different pieces. And so part of that, the meta pattern might be just beating myself up, or unworthiness, or lack of trust, or feeling a victim, or any number of other things that we get to look at and say, oh, okay, so there's a triggering pattern, and then there's a bigger pattern. And if we can address the bigger pattern, then eventually what will happen as the bigger pattern's addressed is the whack-a-mole pieces of the smaller pattern are going to dissolve. So Rosalind says, yes, it works for me. The practice I've been doing is Arhatic yoga. I've never heard of that. That's very cool. So anyway, I think that's it for this morning. I always, always, always appreciate you joining me, and it's such a privilege and a pleasure. So I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection. I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern on the Enlightened World Network Facebook page and YouTube channel, and my Facebook page as well, Mira Rubin. And I highly recommend that you check out the other programming on Enlightened World Network and Enlightened World Living. And once again, I so appreciate you. Until next time, so much love.